Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. So today we're going to be taking a look at this press conference that President-elect Trump held at Mar-a-Lago. And it was covered by the Associated Press. Usually these post-election press conferences, they're pretty, standard stuff. But this one, oh boy, this one has people talking. It's got a lot of, some pretty out there statements. He was talking about expanding American territory. He even had some pretty strong opinions on Jimmy Carter and gas heating.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't your typical political news cycle.
Not at all. So let's just dive right in. And when we talk about Trump, we always think about America first. It was his big campaign promise. But some of these latest statements seem to contradict that.
Yeah, it seems like he might be shifting his foreign policy approach a bit.
He's talking about taking control over the Panama Canal and Greenland.
Right, and those statements have definitely caused a stir. I mean, remember, the U.S. already gave up control of the Panama Canal back in 1999. And Greenland is actually an autonomous territory of Denmark, and Denmark is a U.S. ally.
It's almost like he's redefining what America first means, to include places that aren't even a part of America.
Yeah, and it's particularly interesting when you consider his comments about Canada. He talked about using economic force against them.
Economic force?
Right. It basically means using things like tariffs or trade restrictions to pressure another country to do what you want.
Ah, I see.
And he specifically mentioned the trade deficit with Canada.
Oh, right. He was saying that the U.S. doesn't need their cars or lumber or even their milk.
Exactly.
That's some pretty aggressive language to use towards a neighbor and an ally.
It is.
And then there's a whole thing about Canada maybe becoming the 51st state. At first, I thought he was joking, but he keeps bringing it up.
It's hard to tell how serious he is, but the fact that he keeps mentioning it along with these threats of economic force, that's definitely raising some eyebrows.
Not just in Canada, I bet.
Not just in Canada. A lot of U.S. allies are probably wondering what exactly his definition of America First really means.
You know what else is interesting? Don Jr. is in Greenland right now. What do you make of that?
Well, it definitely adds another layer to this whole situation. People are speculating about Trump's true intentions. Is he actually trying to lay the groundwork for some kind of takeover?
Through economic pressure.
Maybe economic pressure? Or political maneuvering? Or maybe even a combination of both?
Fascinating. Well, while we're on the topic of pressure, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the situation in Gaza. Things are incredibly tense over there.
Yeah, with 100 hostages still being held captive after the recent conflict.
Trump is demanding that a deal for their release be finalized before he even takes office.
He is.
He even sent his envoy, Steve Witkoff, over to Qatar for negotiations. And he said that if a deal isn't reached, all hell will break out.
Yeah, those are some pretty strong words.
They are.
And, Witkoff himself even said that Trump's persona and his impending presidency are actually affecting the negotiations. Yeah, it seems like Trump's reputation for being unpredictable and his willingness to use strong-arm tactics, it's adding a whole new level of pressure to an already volatile situation.
So how does this tie back into his foreign policy approach?
Well, it kind of shows that he's willing to take a more assertive stance on the world stage.
Some might even say aggressive.
Some might even say aggressive. It's definitely a different approach from traditional diplomacy.
Which usually relies on negotiation and compromise.
Right.
So it seems like he's signaling that he's willing to use whatever leverage he has to get what he wants, whether it's economic or political.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to the Panama Canal and Greenland. Do you think he's actually suggesting that he would use military force to take control of those territories?
He hasn't explicitly said that, but just the fact that he's even mentioning it is pretty alarming to a lot of people.
I can see why.
The Panama Canal is a really important shipping route, and Greenland's location in the Arctic makes it strategically important as well.
So it's a pretty bold move to even suggest taking them over.
Bold. Some might even say reckless.
It leaves a lot of people wondering what this means for the future of U.S. foreign policy. Will it be about cooperation and diplomacy, or will it be more about confrontation?
Yeah. Will he be willing to go it alone? We'll have to wait and see.
It's funny because in the article, he criticizes Biden for how he's handling the transition of power, saying that Biden's trying to, sabotage things. But then at the same time, his own team is praising the Biden administration for being so helpful and cooperative. So it just seems a little contradictory.
It definitely raises some questions about what's really happening behind the scenes. It could be a tactic, create this public perception of being under attack, to rally his base and discredit anything Biden does that he doesn't like.
So trying to have it both ways. Publicly criticize Biden, but then quietly benefit from his administration's cooperation.
Exactly. control the narrative, keep his supporters engaged. It's strategic. And we've seen him do this kind of thing throughout his career.
Right.
Like with the ban on offshore drilling.
Oh, yeah, he had a pretty strong reaction to that.
Yeah. Didn't he? He's vowing to reverse it immediately. And he even said he'll take it to court.
But his incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, said the Biden administration has been super helpful with the transition.
It's a mixed message for sure.
It is. So what do you think is driving this? Is it just political strategy? Or does he genuinely believe that Biden is trying to undermine him?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we've seen him blend politics with a genuine sense of, grievance.
That's true. With Trump, it's hard to separate the performance from reality.
It really is.
That's why it's important to pay attention to the details, to try and understand what's really motivating him.
Speaking of details, there's this part in the article that I found kind of curious about his views on gas heating. He said that he wants to overturn regulations on gas heaters because he claims that Biden wants to get rid of them entirely and switch to electric.
Yeah, I saw that too. But actually, it seems like he's referring to a rule from the Energy Department about more efficient water heaters, not a complete ban on gas like he's suggesting.
So it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, a bit.
And then there's that comment he made about gas heat not making you itch, like electric heat supposedly does.
Right.
It's like, I don't know, it's a very simplistic way to talk about a complex issue.
It is.
It feels like he's trying to appeal to a certain part of his base, the people who distrust the government and regulations, and who think that anything about energy efficiency is like an attack on their freedom.
That's a good point. He's using simple language and even humor to connect with people on an emotional level, even if the facts aren't quite right.
This whole press conference is just full of these tangents and, weird pronouncements. It's like he's trying to keep everyone off balance.
Maybe that's the strategy. Keep everyone guessing. That way he stays in control. And unpredictable.
It's worked for him in the past, but will it work now that he's president again?
We'll see.
Okay, so we can't talk about this press conference without talking about his criticism of Jimmy Carter. To criticize a former president on the day his body is being taken to Washington for his funeral. That's pretty unusual, even for Trump.
It is. It's a big departure from how presidents usually act. Yeah. There's this unwritten rule that presidents should be respectful of their predecessors, no matter what party they're from.
It's about respect to the office.
Exactly.
But Trump doesn't seem to care about those rules.
He doesn't. It's because he sees himself as an outsider, someone who came to Washington to shake things up, to change everything.
Right.
So in his mind, that means rejecting all the traditional rules.
Makes sense. He went after Carter for signing the treaty that returned the Panama Canal to Panama.
Which was back in 1977.
Way back then. It felt very out of place.
Especially with the timing.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about how much he really understands history and diplomacy.
The Panama Canal Treaty was a big deal.
It was. But it was a peaceful transfer of control.
And it's been good for both the U.S. and Panama.
Right.
But Trump's acting like it was some kind of betrayal.
It shows how he sees the world as winners and losers. Strength and weakness.
Like a zero-sum game.
Exactly. Where any compromise is a loss.
But diplomacy isn't really about winning or losing. It's about finding common ground.
And building relationships.
Which is where Trump struggles.
He does. He's much more comfortable with confrontation and deal-making, even if it means upsetting allies.
And making enemies.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for his second term? More of the same.
It's possible. He's made it very clear that he doesn't want to play by the rules.
He's a disruptor.
He is.
A change agent.
And that can be both good and bad.
Depends on how you look at it. It's going to be an interesting 4 years.
Interesting. And maybe a little scary.
Yeah.
The whole world is watching to see what he'll do.
And the stakes are high.
Very high. His decisions will affect so many people.
Here in America and around the world.
They will.
It's easy to just get caught up in all the drama of what he's saying. But we got to remember that words have consequences. When he talks about, annexing Greenland or renegotiating the Panama Canal Treaty, that sends a message.
Oh, absolutely. It sends shockwaves through the international community. Think about it from our allies' perspective. They've always seen the U.S. as a reliable partner. Stable. Predictable.
Right.
And now they're hearing him talk about economic force and these unilateral actions. It makes them wonder if he's going to just completely upend all these agreements and alliances.
Yeah, it's got to create a lot of uncertainty.
A lot of anxiety, too.
It's almost like he's changing the rules of the game without even talking to anyone.
Exactly. And that kind of unpredictability can be dangerous.
How so?
Well, it creates this environment where miscalculations and misunderstandings can happen.
And then those escalate into conflict.
Yeah.
So what about our adversaries? What are they thinking when they hear this stuff?
Well, they might see it as an opportunity, like a chance to take advantage of the instability.
Test us.
Yeah, to see how far they can push things.
Like what?
Well, China might get more aggressive in the South China Sea, knowing that the U.S. is distracted with other things.
Right.
Or Russia might try to assert more control in Eastern Europe.
So even if he doesn't actually do all these things, just talking about them can have a real impact.
Absolutely. It's like a ripple effect.
Destabilizing things all over the world.
Exactly.
Which is why we have to pay attention to what he's saying and analyze it.
And understand what it all means.
Let's go back to the Gaza hostage situation for a second. It seems like he's trying to show everyone that he's a strong leader, that he can get things done even before he officially becomes president.
Oh, definitely. He wants to project this image of strength.
And control.
Right. But there's risk involved with that approach.
Like what?
Well, his demands for a deal before he takes office and his threats about all hell breaking loose, it could backfire.
How so?
It could make the hostage takers dig in their heels.
It makes them less willing to compromise.
Exactly. They know they're dealing with someone who's not afraid to use ultimatums.
And who likes to make threats.
Right.
So it's a gamble. We'll have to see if it pays off. But no matter what happens, this whole thing gives us some insight into how he might handle foreign policy in his second term.
I think so, too. It shows that he's willing to be more assertive in international relations.
More confrontational, even.
Right, which is very different from how a lot of other presidents have dealt with things.
I think it's safe to say that things are going to be pretty turbulent on the world stage.
It seems that way, which is why it's so important for people to be informed and engaged.
More than ever.
Yeah, we need to understand what's going on, and we need to hold our leaders accountable.
So to everyone listening, here's what you can take away from this deep dive. First, don't just believe the headlines. Dig a little deeper. Consider different perspectives. Don't fall for easy answers. And second, remember that words have power, especially when they're coming from someone like the president. Even if he's just trying to sound tough, his words can have real consequences.
Absolutely.
And finally, stay engaged. We're facing some really complex problems in the world, and it's up to all of us to be informed and thoughtful, and to participate in shaping our future.
Well said. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening.
It really is.
But we can't tune it all out.
You can't.
We need to be critical thinkers, and we need to be active participants in our democracy.
I agree. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore more of these themes. As we try to make sense of this new era in American politics and global affairs.
It's going to be a wild ride.